wrapped up in the things you are here to fulfill. Whatever you choose for a career path, remember the struggles along the way are only meant to shape you for your purpose.
Welcome to In Bloom. I am your host, Michaela Richmond, and this is a pro-humanity podcast.
Alrighty, welcome to today's episode. So a little bit of background on Hannah Frankman, our guest today. She is a freelancer, a digital nomad. She travels a ton. But today I got to sit down and talk with her specifically about her traveling and her work. It was really interesting for me to sit down and ask her some questions about this because I think we've always heard about digital nomads. I've always heard about digital nomads. I've always heard about freelancing. But I didn't know logistically what it would be like. And recently I've kind of made it more of an option for myself. So I just kind of wanted to hear what she had to say on why it was a great lifestyle, why she continued to choose it, any of her tips and tricks whenever it came to traveling and working pretty much for herself, keeping her own schedule, etc. So I hope y'all enjoy this episode. It was so much fun to record. It was like a conversation with a really good friend. So I do hope that y'all enjoy it. Let's get into it.
Your very existence is wrapped up in the things you are here to fulfill. Whatever you choose for a career path, remember the struggles along the way are only meant to shape you for your purpose.
Welcome to In Bloom. I am your host, Michaela Richmond, and this is a pro-humanity podcast.
Today I have on Hannah Frankman. She is amazing. She does all kinds of interesting things. I'm so excited to pick her brain and to really get a feel for how she's choosing to live her life. It's very different, and I'm excited to learn. So hi Hannah.
Hi, Ella. I'm excited to be here. I was really excited when I got your message inviting me on. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so you have a very, very unique way of going about life. You are a freelancer. You do a lot of different things, and I know you've traveled a lot. How did you begin doing that?
That is a great question. I don't exactly know where to start the story. It was a very, very long form evolution that brought me here. It was not necessarily a super deliberate life goal, and rather a series of decisions over time where I was like, this thing feels right, I'm going to do this, and then it led to the next thing. I used to work full-time at practice, and I was doing like the normal full-time startup thing for years, and I thought that was the track I was going to be on for a while. But I discovered freelancing is actually much more aligned with how I like to work. And also I've always been a person that likes to do a lot of things. So freelancing allows me to work with multiple clients and doing multiple different types of work, which I really enjoy. So it felt like it was something that happened very organically. I didn't set out to become a freelancer. I started freelancing in 2021, and it was not a deliberate, like, okay, I think I'm going to try my hand at being a freelancer now. It was hey, this person wants me to do some work for them, and I'm not really looking for a full-time job, but I'd be happy to work with them on a part-time basis. And then that happened a couple more times, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, I think I'm a freelancer now. Like, I think that's what you call this. Type of person that was very interested in alternative ways of doing the education thing. And then as I established myself as an adult, starting to build a career, I started doing some teaching and stuff. And so coming out of praxis, it was a very natural segue to like pick up other education type projects. So I do one-on-one coaching with people. I do curriculum development for different organizations. I teach online courses. So all of those different like education type projects sort of are one umbrella here, but then I also do a lot of writing for different organizations and companies too. Some of my biggest clients are writing clients. And then I do some marketing work too. Like I'm running marketing right now at an ed tech startup, which is sort of like a random piece of all of this. So it fills a lot of different buckets, but it kind of like there's a set of skills I'm drawing from as I'm picking up these different types of work. And I like it varied too. It keeps life a lot more interesting than just doing one thing all day, every day, which is a good way to be too, but I'm really enjoying the diversity thing too.
No, I agree. I kind of like varied as well. What are the downsides versus the upsides of freelance work?
The upsides are substantial. You have a lot more freedom. You have a lot more control over what you're working on and what you're not. The ability to have multiple clients and multiple streams of income is definitely a stress reducer too. Like if a client's not working well, you can fire them. Or if a client's saying like, hey, this isn't working out for me, it's like, okay, I'm sad to lose a client, but I also have multiple other places that I'm using to sustain myself financially. So I'm okay if I lose this client. And I think to me, it feels much more aligned with like the natural state of existence for a person, or at least for me, where you're not so stuck in one job or working with one person that's, you know, maybe it's not a great fit, or it's really stressful, or you're working with a boss that you really don't like and you feel kind of stuck there because you have this long form arrangement with them or no backup plan, so you feel really stuck, and that induces a lot of stress. And I feel like freelancing, at least for me and the way I'm wired, I like it very much because it feels much more like a natural way of interacting with other people and other businesses. Again, I like very much that I get to work at multiple different companies and wear multiple different hats. Like I'm working for multiple organizations right now that I think are awesome. And I'd be really hard pressed to pick just one of them to work with if somebody was trying to bring me on full time. And I've turned down full-time offers over the past year too, because I really like working with multiple people. So that's a big perk too. The fluidity of being able to what you charge is also really nice, because it's not just like you're locked into a salary. Every time I pick up a new project, I'm negotiating rates again. So you can move your rates up much faster, and you can also charge by output instead of by hours. So instead of like locking in, okay, I'm working 40 hours a week for you at a fixed rate, no matter what I'm producing for you, it really incentivizes efficiency, because you can say, okay, I'm going to like build this marketing campaign for you. I'm going to write this series of blog posts, and we determine together that the value of that is X. And then as quickly as I can get it done, I'm making this much money, regardless of how much time it takes. And that's really nice too. Again, it feels like a more natural order of like businesses and individuals interacting. And then the freedom too of being able to say like, okay, this month I want to travel a bunch and I'm not going to pick up as many clients, and I don't have to like put in notice for my job or get permission from anybody. I can just do what I want. And I really like that too. Downsides, it definitely requires a lot more discipline than just working at a job. It's much more self-directed, and it can be a lot less reliable too. Like if you lose a client, or you're working, like you don't have retainers, you're just working on a project by project basis, and you don't pick up many projects one month, you have to be able to absorb like having a really quiet month. And so depending on how people's lives and their clients are set up, that can be more or less stressful, but that's definitely a downside to it. But that can be tough too, to be like, okay, I want to be a freelancer and I need to go find people who are going to pay me for this, and then I'm going to have to go do that again. Like that has to be something that you're excited about. But honestly, the hardest part of being a freelancer is getting started. Because once you establish yourself, you start getting referrals, and you start building reputation, and you start building financial stability, and then it gets a lot easier from there.
So how do you get started?
I got started I set the foundation for being a freelancer like 5 years ago, and I didn't know it. Because all of my clients last year came in by referral. So backstory, I've been with Praxis for almost, I guess it's 5.5 years. It's been a while. And I was an intern with them to start with, and then I was a contractor, and then I was full-time with them for 3 years. And I left full-time at the end of January of last year. And I took a sabbatical because I didn't know, like I knew that I needed to like take steps to move forward in my career, and I didn't really know what was next, and I didn't know how to figure out what was next. So like my default was like, okay, I'm going to leave this full-time job and I have to just like go get another full-time job to replace it. But something about that didn't feel right. So I said, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take some time. I'm going to figure this out. And I took 8 months off. So I was working with, I'm still contracting with Praxis. I'm still an advisor there. So I was still doing that. And then in the spring, I started working with the Objective Standard Institute as an instructor, doing like month-long courses with them. So, and that's very project-based. It's like, okay, we're going to run a course in April and you're going to come in and teach. And then after April, like your course is over and there's nothing to do until your next course comes up. So that was like super project-based. So technically I was kind of working, but those were the only things I was doing and I wasn't trying to pick up any clients. And I got started because people started reaching out to me and asking me to do work for them. And they came to me because I'd built a foundation over the course of like the 5 years prior of building relationships and building a reputation and talking publicly about my work. One of my biggest clients, the company I'm doing marketing with right now, they found me, their CEO found me in a newsletter I'd been mentioned in. And it was just like me talking about growing up homeschooled and working in alternative education. She's like, wait a second, this is really aligned with what we're trying to build. We should talk. I got another client, like a curriculum development client, from the work that I'd done at Praxis in my network of people who knew me and knew the work I was doing. And they were like, hey, we're looking for somebody who can help us develop a curriculum for this program. We know you have this skill set. Do you want to come in and help us with this? So for me, it was a very cumulative process of, I had just built enough collateral that people were coming to me. But I think that's something, like, you don't have to wait 5 years and have a happy accident to start freelancing. I just got really lucky in that regard because I didn't know that was the path that I was on, and it turned out to be a really great fit for me. But you can engineer the same effect by talking publicly about what you're doing and building a reputation and building a network of people who know you and like working with you and trust you and have some level of respect for your capabilities. And that can become a really strong funnel for inbound leads for freelance projects. And then there's also the more like, if you wake up tomorrow and you go, wait a second, I want to be a freelancer. The simple answer is like, just go start a Fiverr account or an Upwork account and start offering gigs and charging a low rate and building up referrals and reviews and then building up your rate. And you can establish yourself as a freelancer pretty quickly that way too. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And really at its essence, it's just about somehow you have to prove to the world that you can do stuff that's valuable to other people. And then you have to talk about that somewhere where people can find you. And once you do those two things, eventually when you hit a critical mass of people seeing what you're doing and resonating with it, the opportunities will follow.
So how do you go about creating that, I guess, those platforms for yourself? Like you want to talk about what you're doing, but where do you start? Do you start where other people are, like the people that you want to talk to? You're like, okay, well, I know they're here, so let me get in and then begin. Or like, how do you find those people and find those opportunities for yourself?
Yeah, I like thinking about this in terms of networks, because when you just think about the time expenditure, it's the most cost-effective way of doing this. Like you want to get in front of as many people as possible for the lowest amount of effort possible, right? Like that's the goal. So like somehow you have to be talking about the things that you do, the interests that you have, the skills that you have in a place where people are going to see that. And so you kind of want to figure out who your target audience is. And you don't have to be super prescriptive about this. Like it's okay to not know. Because again, like, you know, over the course of a few years, I built up enough of a portfolio that I was able to start freelancing, and it wasn't a prescriptive thing for me. It wasn't like, okay, well, you know, when I turn 24, I want to become a freelancer. So I need to go have this blog post that I'm writing 3 years in advance that's going to just like do really well in Google search results. And like, I can perfectly predict that all of this is going to happen. It's going to take me here. It doesn't have to be that prescriptive. But I would say, to the extent that you can predict it. Like think about who are the types of people that I would love to work with, or who are the types of people that I think would have opportunities for me. And it can be as simple as like, I'm really interested in tech startups, so I'm just going to go get really active on tech Twitter, because that's a great place. Like I can respond to somebody's tweet and all of a sudden I'm having a Twitter conversation with somebody who 6 months from now might have a great opportunity for me. Like they might actually become a legitimate network connection. So like it can be as simple as that, but figure out where the people that you want to work with live on the internet, and then go put your content there. Like if you are really interested in, I don't know, sales, and you want to be like a sales consultant or something, write blog posts if you want, if that format feels more organic to you, but go post them on LinkedIn, because salespeople hang out on LinkedIn. So like that's the place you want to be talking about your work. That's kind of how I would think about it. I don't know how well that answers your question or not, but that's sort of where I would start like distilling it into actual action items.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's perfect. Kind of a similar question. How do you design your portfolio so it gets you the kind of job opportunities, people, just like attention that you actually want?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm actually a great example for this, because I'm not that intentional about my portfolio. It's more of a network thing for me. And I've built a strong network, so I'm able to get away with that. But I don't know that that's necessarily the approach I would tell somebody else to take to go replicate what I'm doing. I'm not sure it's the most efficient approach. It just has worked for me. Like I have a full calendar, so it's a non-issue for me. But I think for me, it's been, because a lot of the stuff that I do is more, it's less technical and more cerebral, for lack of a better word. Like I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of education design, I do a lot of coaching, which is like live conversations with people. So for me, when I'm talking about the things that I'm thinking through, or a coaching interaction that I had, or a project that I'm working on, and kind of like the process for how I'm thinking through these things, that serves as a really strong indicator to people how I work and what types of things I'm working on. And then the credentials of like, hey, I'm teaching this course with the Objective Standard Institute, that carries some level of proof that like, okay, she must at least kind of know what she's doing if somebody's paying her to teach this course. Mm-hmm. And that adds another level of credibility. So like when I was, when I taught the most recent version of the course I teach with the Objective Standard Institute, I taught it in November of last year. And I was trying to gain signups from my own network. So I was sharing like promotional materials about my course on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, just like all my social networks. And I was just talking about my process building the course. And I was like sharing photos of whiteboards and screenshots of like course prep. And I was talking through like, here's how I'm thinking through this. Here's what we're going to be talking about. And the goal was for that to make people kind of curious. They look at a whiteboard and they're like, wait a second, there's a lot of interesting stuff on here, but I don't really see how it fits together. I kind of want to go take this course and see what's going on here. But it also served as a level of proof that of my process building an educational experience. And people can see the whiteboard that I'm outlining like the exercises for the course or something like that. And they're able to see, oh, this is how she works on something like this. When we're looking for somebody who can do some type of education project, they're going to remember that whiteboard and they're going to go, oh, I kind of want to work with Hannah. Hopefully. So that's kind of how I approach it. I think like if you're working on a more technical skill set, or even if I was trying to land like a bunch of marketing clients and I was trying to showcase the more technical side of my marketing skill set that I'm utilizing now for this ed tech company, I would be much more deliberate about showcasing the technical skills. So like building a portfolio of screenshots, stats, video walkthroughs, or like a blog post write-up about it, something like that would be how I was structuring it. But my approach generally is a little more like organic, talking about the process, and then maybe writing some recaps when I finished a project of like, oh, here's what I did, here's how I did it, and here's how I thought through it.
No, I like that. And it's kind of similar. So like the taking a picture of the whiteboard is kind of similar to those TikToks you see of like some artists showing their whole stage of like, okay, I'm at this stage. Okay, I'm at this stage. And it's just like oh, wow, they've put a lot of work into this, and it kind of builds a little bit of a reputation. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. Those videos are really cool. They showcase a lot of, they're intriguing. They work that way because you start watching, you're like, wait, what is this going to look like when it's done? Or maybe you get a photo of the painting at the beginning, but then they're like painting the entire canvas green, and you're like, how do we get from point A to point B? So you want to keep watching. But it's also like seeing that process gives you these people so much legitimacy that, yeah, that's a strong metaphor. I like that.
Yeah, it really does. Okay, so do you, like, whenever you approach your freelancing, is it like a business in your mind, or is it tiny skills, like you're breaking yourself up into these skill sets and these projects, or is it just like this big overarching, this is my business kind of a view?
More the latter, more the projects, but kind of neither. I don't think either way quite resonates to how I think about it. So I think I've always thought of work and life in general as being very integrated. The lines have always been very blurred to me. And work has always been, I've always thought about it as projects. Like even when I've had full-time jobs and I'm working for somebody, like that job is a project to me. Like, okay, I'm excited about learning these things, or learning from these people, or building these specific outcomes here. And I've always thought about the work I'm doing in the context of those types of goals. And I've also always thought about it in terms of how I want to grow. My approach to my career has always been, okay, I want to go learn about this thing. How can I get paid to learn it? Like, how can somebody pay me to go obsess over this problem and figure this thing out? So when I'm thinking about my freelancing, I'm kind of thinking about it from those two angles of like pretty fluid interplay between just like life in general versus work. And it's all kind of, the goals for both are very entwined for me. And it's very, like each thing that I take on, I think of as a project. And the thing that's driving that project is either I really want to build something here, like somebody approaches me about working on a curriculum build, and I'm like, I'm really excited about this. I want to build this thing too. This is my project now. Or somebody approaches me as something that I want to learn about, like a company coming to me and saying, hey, can you do all this marketing stuff for us? And me going like, okay, I technically understand how to do all of this, but I've never done it in this context before. So this is a great opportunity to learn a bunch of things. So I think of it less as like an overarching freelance business. And I don't even necessarily think of myself as a freelancer. It's more just like the term that works. Like it's technically the right term, but I don't wake up in the morning and go like, I am a freelancer. It's more organic than that. And it kind of depends on the project too.
No, that makes a lot of sense. What is like a day in your life look like? What time do you get up in the morning? How do you structure your day? You have freedom, so you get to do what you want. How does it usually look?
It really varies too, and a lot of it varies based on my travel. I like getting my day started fairly early, but I'm also not like a super, super early morning person because I find I think really well at night. So I don't want to sacrifice my like clear-headed. Once the sun goes down, the world's just clearer. I just think better. So
I resonate with that so deeply.
So I try to find a balance between those two things of like liking to start my day early, but also liking to think at night. Mm-hmm. And I usually start my day. One of the things I like best about freelancing actually is that I feel like I have more freedom in how I structure my day. And I feel less stress in the mornings than, not that I needed to feel stress in the mornings as a full-time employee, but I always felt like, you know, I want to be a little early to get in and start working. And I want to be like a little ahead of the curve once everything gets busy for the day. And I feel like I have more freedom with my mornings now. So I usually start the day with, I do Julia Cameron's morning pages every day. So I'll sit down and write. It's basically, it's three pages of longhand journaling by hand. as an exercise to clear your mind at the start of the day and get you focused, and just to reflect on whatever things that you need to process through before you can go get focused and have a productive day. And if you've never heard of Julia Cameron's morning pages, I would highly recommend looking them up. They're really phenomenal. So I start my day with that and some meditation. And then from there, the day becomes kind of less structured as we go. It kind of depends. Sometimes I have really busy days, and I like stacking my busy days at the start of the week. Like, I really love working a ton of hours on Monday. I love Mondays, and I love feeling super productive on Mondays. So I usually try to get like big chunks of project work done early in the week. And then I also usually really like doing a big chunk of work on Fridays. I really like Fridays too, but not because it's the end of the week. I just find it really easy to go all out and be productive when I know that like I'm going to spend the weekend not having to do anything. So I can go all out and burn myself out, right? Like you can go all in. But it really kind of depends. I think one of the things that I've learned as a freelancer that's been a really important lesson for me is listening to myself better and not being like, okay, I have to have this super stringent routine every single day. And, you know, like I woke up with a headache, but I still have to work 8 hours because you're supposed to. Like, I like having the flexibility to say, I'm really tired today, or I'm not really not focused today. And I don't feel like I'm being very productive. So I'm going to go take a walk and get some sunshine and then come back to my desk when I feel better. I try to be a little more organic about it. And I feel like my productivity's gone way up because I've done that. Like, I'm much more efficient with the blocks of time that I'm actually working. And I think a lot of people have a lot of presuppositions about how you're supposed to work and how much time in a day you're supposed to spend looking productive, even if you're just sitting in your house and nobody can see you. There's like a guilt trip that a lot of people have where, well, if I didn't work hard enough today, like what am I doing to be worthwhile? And that's a sticky thing to unlearn, even when you're not like a super high achiever. And then for people who like want to be successful in their careers, it's even harder to unlearn. But I try to be deliberate about how much I'm listening to what I actually need and how I'm going to be most productive. But like the specifics of what I do in a day really kind of vary, and it depends on the client that I'm working with. Like right now I have a lot of standing meetings on my calendar on certain days in the week. And so I just do like my days kind of structured around those meetings. Like I'm trying to get things done before those meetings, and then like, here's how much time I have after these meetings to do stuff. But it's hard to give like an exact picture of a day to day, because really it's just the morning that has a routine. And then the rest of the day is kind of shaped around what's on my to-do list, how I feel like I'll be most productive doing it, and what other things I want to spend my day doing, which I think is also an important thing to listen to.
I agree. I think it's this crazy thing where whenever you have the freedom and you have the space and you have the time, and you can recognize and give yourself that space to be like, oh, actually, I'm really tired right now. And then just go and take a nap, or go and, go for a walk or whatever. Like it's so freeing. Last night I did this exact thing. I needed to edit something, and I was just like, I stared at my computer and I was like, all right, I'm not going to be productive right now. Like, just something about me knows that right now it's not going to work. I'm exhausted or something. So let me go and take a nap. And so I did for like an hour and a half. And then I came back and I was like, all right, ready to go. And then it's just like my output is better. And it's like project versus time. I'd rather the project. If I can get it done in 30 minutes versus 2 hours, like time is valuable.
Yeah, there's this very skewed assumption that I think a lot of people have around productivity, where they think about, again, the hours that are standard to a salary position versus the output that's more standard to freelancing, which is part of why I'm so excited about the fact that it's so much easier to be a freelancer than it used to be. And so many more people are, because it really it disconnects those two things that really shouldn't be connected, like hours and output. But a lot of people just think about how many hours they're putting in. And there's a lot of a lot of glorification of just blindly hustling, and like objectively working hard it's a virtue, it's a good thing, but it's not inherently a virtue without being properly applied. Like you have to have an actual productive goal that you're working towards. And then when you work really hard on that goal, then it becomes a good thing to work really hard. But if you're just working really hard for the sake of working hard, it's sort of a neutral, like, okay, you're working hard, but why? And I think a lot of people think about their output based on metrics that don't really matter versus saying, okay, this is actually what I want to accomplish this month, this year, the next 5 years. And here's how I want to structure my days in light of that, and how I want to approach my work in light of that. And maybe sometimes I really do have to hustle and push through the discomfort and burn myself out a little bit. And when done deliberately, that can be a good thing. But it has to come from a place of long-term perspective, not just, I don't really know what I'm doing, so I'm going to work really hard and hope that gets me somewhere. And it's like, no, you're burning yourself out over a job that you don't care about and with no real upward mobility because you just think you should. And that's not very productive, actually.
Yep. It's I think of it in terms of like compounding choices. It's like, okay, well, whenever you work, the goal is an end product. Like you're not working to get to nothing. I think that's also kind of skewed today because we have so many, we have a lot of 9-to-5s. Like you get used to doing your job, which is this barrier, but you don't see the fact that no, like work is getting something done. It's putting our human creative energy into something to get to an output. And the journey is definitely important, but if you don't recognize that there's a specific output that needs to be gotten to, like, then you're just working for no reason. And what's the point of that? There is none. So that's just kind of like, I don't know, pointless. Like you kind of have to have that directed focus and then make the choices to get there and then compound that working hard. And some days, especially with freelancing, some days you're going to work really hard, and then other days you're not going to work as hard, and it's okay. Like you're still getting there.
Yeah, definitely. That was a really important thing. That was part of why I took a sabbatical. Because I was like, I need just like a hard reset on how I'm approaching work, and I just need to take time off in order to get there.
How was that sabbatical for you?
It was awesome. It was really great. I had 0 rules, including no hard end date, because what I was trying to do was unwind from all of the pieces of me that had gotten really tied up around metrics and outputs and goals and things that were very externally focused and not very internally grounded at all. Like I wasn't setting all these goals because it felt right to me. I was thinking in those terms because I thought that was what I needed to do in order to get somewhere. And I needed just like a hard reset on all of that. So I had no idea. I didn't even know I was taking a sabbatical until I was like 3 weeks in. And I was like, I think this is a sabbatical. And I started using the term because I didn't know how else to explain to people what I was doing. And I learned that sabbatical was a term that would shut people up. So if people are like, so what are you doing with yourself now? And I'm like, I'm taking a sabbatical. People will be like, oh, that sounds legit. Okay, we'll stop asking you questions. Like I wasn't expected to have any other answers. And so it was convenient, but I actually think it was the right term too. It was what I was doing. But it was great. Like I didn't know if it was going to be 2 months or 4 months. I didn't think it was going to last 8 months, but it did. And I'm glad it did. And basically my only rule was that I wasn't ending the sabbatical until I actually knew what I wanted to do. And by knew what I wanted to do, I mean, find something that I'm actually sincerely excited about. Like I didn't want to go back to working full-time hours until I'd found something that lit me up. And I was in a place where I could do that.
Financially?
Like I wouldn't necessarily, financially, in terms of just like life circumstance, I'd set myself up in a way where I could take the time. And I did that deliberately. And I knew that it didn't really matter how long it took to find the next thing. I just needed to make sure it was the right thing. And I wouldn't give people that advice when they're like just starting out necessarily, because you kind of got to try stuff first and explore. But I'd hit a point where like I had enough data points to know, to figure it out. I just needed time for the right thing to come along. And it felt very intuitively right to grant myself that space to wait for the right thing. So yeah, I just did whatever I wanted for a few months. And some of that was work related stuff. Like I said, I was coaching and I was teaching courses and building courses for the Objective Standard Institute. I was writing a lot, but I just wanted to see like, okay, if I give myself a vacuum, because I haven't had one in a long time, what sorts of things are naturally going to bubble up? Like, what am I just going to start gravitating towards spending my time on? Like, there's not going to be a reading list or like a number of books read goal or anything like that. It's just going to be naturally like, I wake up in the morning and where do I want to put my time? And I learned a lot about myself from that. Like, I didn't know I wanted to be a freelancer when I started. I thought I was going to take a couple months off and then find another full-time startup job that really excited me. And then I got 2 or 3 months in and I was like, that sounds like a terrible idea. Like, I don't want to do that. And then, I thought I was going to spend a lot of time reading, and I actually spent a ton of time writing instead. And I didn't really predict that at the start of the sabbatical. It just sort of happened. So it was a really great experience. And I'm coming out of it as a very strong advocate for taking time off. I think once you hit a certain point in your career, downtime is important too. And it's something that, again, like we think about productivity based on output. So it's not necessarily something that people go around recommending all the time, but I'm a pretty staunch advocate now for taking downtime. I think it's a really important part of the growing process. We're not moving in a straight line, going exactly 60 miles an hour all the time types of creatures. We're cyclical creatures. Like, we need the on time and the downtime. And it's important to give yourself both to really facilitate growth in both yourself and your career.
It's interesting that you say all of this because, so like, I think we've opened the door to this conversation of what does human work look like? Because I think that we've really kind of messed it up a little bit. And I think that this is partially a result of the industrial era. It's like, okay, we're going to have factory workers. We're going to have mass production. We're going to have KPIs that are stringent and like deeply enforced. And everybody's going to think in terms of ROI and cost and benefits and all of these things that are not bad and they're good. And you need some sort of measurement and you need some sort of goal. But I think that we've almost gone so far that, like, you're right. There's so many people that would right now benefit so deeply from a sabbatical to just not even decompress from their work, but like figure out who they are beyond all of the other stuff that has been put on top of them. So like, what are your thoughts on real human work? How did you get back in touch with yourself, and where do you think we go?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time walking. Walking was really good for me. It cleared me out. Journaling is also good. Would also recommend. And seeking out people who you actually legitimately admire, or people that you feel very drawn to. Like, there were books I read and podcasts I listened to where I wouldn't necessarily classify the speaker or the author as someone I admire. Like, it's not that I don't either. It's just not the right word. It's not like I look at them and go, I want to be this person. But I knew there was something there that I was very compelled by. And I feel very strongly that it's important to listen to your curiosity, because you're drawn to things for a reason. There's a reason you're curious about stuff. And usually it's a very good reason. There's something there that you need to understand or that's going to be useful to you in the future. So I just spent time listening to people I was curious about and understanding how, like, sometimes it's as simple as someone's turn of phrase. Like, they're talking about how they look at this idea or this aspect of life, and the way they describe it just clicks something. And you're like, oh, that's a great way of thinking about it. Like it makes a lot more sense when it's framed that way. So I think that's part of it is just like expanding how you're thinking about things, because it's really easy when you're locked into a really busy lifestyle with a fairly prescriptive set of responsibilities and goals and stressors and obligations, and you don't have a ton of time to just reflect on all of it. It's really important to just expand how you're thinking about everything and then see kind of organically what starts to fall into place and how the pieces start to come together once you give yourself that space, which is basically what I did for a few months. I was just exploring like podcasts, books, my own thought processes, my own interests, and just seeing kind of organically what all came together as I gave it time. But in terms of work, to answer the first half of your question, I really think the answer is very individual. I don't think there is one correct answer, but I think there is a formula for deriving the answer. I think you're going to get a different answer based on the individual inputs of the person, but there is a way to think about what's right for an individual that's at least relatively standard across people. And I think it really just comes down to like, what do you want? What's important to you? Like, and not what do you want in the context of a handful of career paths that are sort of standard. It's like, okay, pick one. Like not like a guidance counselor questionnaire version of what do you want, but a more introspective and reflective, like what's actually important to you? Like, do you really value your freedom to do whatever you want? Okay, why? When you have that freedom, what do you want to do with it? Do you really value money and you don't really care what kind of work you're doing? You just want to make as much money as possible? Like I know people who are driven by that. They don't really care what they're doing in their day-to-day. They just want to make a lot of money in their job. And if that's what's important to you, then that's how you go about structuring the work that you're doing. But we have this set of defaults that a lot of people fall into that don't require the creative reflection. It's like, okay, I know that I'm interested in these types of things, so I'm going to go work this type of job. And for some people, that actually is the most aligned thing. But for some people, it's kind of a cop-out where it's like, okay, I don't have to do all the hard reflective work to figure out what I actually want to do. But I think you just kind of have to think about it in terms of your own hierarchy of values and desires. And then once you do that, you start to see, okay, these are the things that are most interesting to me. And these are the things that are going to like help me design the lifestyle that I want. And then once you have that information, then you can find the kind of work that's aligned, whether it's working a full-time job at different startups and you love the hustle and you want to work really hard and work long hours and build something awesome and get it off the ground, whether you want to be a freelancer, whether you want to like work a job that's not so mentally taxing so you can come home at night and compose music or write novels or whatever it is that you want to do. I think it is a really personal answer for most people. And really the question is like, how do I reflectively figure that out? And that's something that I think a lot of people don't do because it's hard. It takes work. It takes time.
It does. And it also takes courage. Like, it's not normal to do that. It's not normal in today's world to be like, okay, this is actually not good for me. I'm not thriving as an individual. And I think that's really difficult because it's almost like we've gotten used to not thriving. It's like, as an individual, it's like, it's okay. Like to the end that I need money, or to the end that I have what other people say I need to have. Like, I guess I have to do these XYZ things that I don't actually want to do. And I think it's not fair. Like, it's not a good thing that we have that, I guess, pre-instilled thought process.
Yeah, it's definitely not conducive to living the most fulfilled and self-actualized life you possibly could. You have to put in the work if you want to get there.
Yeah, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about like great people, just like great people that have lived throughout history that have created something amazing. So like the greatest artists, the greatest inventors, the greatest engineers, like just the greatest people that are still remembered today, that we still listen to and look at and think, wow. And it's like, we all know internally and intuitively that they took time to master their craft, and it wasn't a KPI kind of a thing. It wasn't a, okay, how do I grind today on this, piano whatever, so that I can make sure that tomorrow I'm better than whatever. It was just kind of like, but like, I believe that intuition is so there. Every time that I listen to myself, or I do something that I'm like, yeah, I think I should do this. I don't know why, but I think I should. It usually turns out much better than if I hadn't.
Yeah, I make a lot of my decisions based on intuition. And the way I see personally, the way I see the hierarchy is like the intuition's there to tell you what to do. The logic's there to help you figure out why it's the right thing to do. And you need both. Like I don't always, sometimes I'm just like, this feels right, I'm going to do it. But sometimes I'll check too. I'll be like, because I want to understand. I'll be like, okay, like this feels like the right thing to do. Here's why. Because sometimes you have to be able to explain it to other people too. You can't just be like, well, my gut told me to. And they're like, but what does that mean? Depending on who you're talking to. So it's helpful to have the two working in tandem. Like there's a reason why we have both. But yeah, I think the things that we're naturally drawn to, both the senses that we have, like sometimes the intuitive senses that we get are just like we've taken in a ton of data from the world around us, and we haven't gotten to a place where we can consciously articulate what we're observing, but we know we're observing something. And being able to trust that's really important. So like listening to your intuition is a really important thing, but also following your natural curiosity, because again, like the things we're curious about, at the very least, they're recurring. So there are patterns to what we're innately interested in as an individual. And when you follow the things that you're curious about, you see over time often these curiosities recurring, and like over time you're building, even if you're just going down rabbit holes and reading things that you find interesting, like over time you're accumulating a valuable body of knowledge on specific topics that you find interesting, but you'll probably come back to those things again and want to work on projects in those areas or take on jobs in those areas. And following what you're curious about, it's really important, because it's often the best compass to send you in the direction of the things that are going to make you happy and fulfilled and unlock opportunities for you.
I agree. It's an interesting concept that like, if you do what you love, I mean, this is what I found, at least. If you do what you love, much of the time there are actually more opportunities that show in front of you, just because you'll exude a certain type of energy. You're excited, you'll put more into it. You want to network with the type of people. Like, you can only really commit yourself to the level of like real success in the things that you actually care about.
Yeah, that's definitely true. People want to work with other people who are legitimately excited about things. And when there's like true excitement, it doesn't even have to be passion. I think passion is too loaded of a word, because it implies a definitiveness that I think intimidates people sometimes. It's like, but I don't know if this is my passion, and that's okay. Like, are you legitimately excited about it? But that legitimate excitement is a very different type of energy that you're bringing to the world and how you're interacting. And people want to work with that. It's very magnetic.
I agree. So what do you say to people that like, what is your thought about the fact that sometimes people don't like whenever you listen too much to your emotions? Like, where's the line between I'm going to be intuitive and listen to my intuition versus I'm going to listen to my emotions, or I'm going, like, I guess, I mean, I may be answering this in my head, but the more that you write, the more that you really understand yourself, the more you can tell the difference
between intuition versus just like emotion, like I want this versus this feels right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It just takes practice. And I think at your core, you always know the difference. I think you do. Like they're two very different things, and they're hard to discern sometimes, but they're different. The experience of them is different. And I think one, it's a matter of awareness. So just practice, the more that you listen to your intuition, the stronger it will get. It's like giving it permission. It's like you water it a little bit. It's like, oh, you're giving me permission to grow. Okay. And then two, I think some of it's an honesty thing too. Like sometimes it's really, 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 really hard to admit what your intuition's telling you because you have really strong conflicting emotions. And so you hide behind, well, I don't know which one's my emotions and which one's my intuition. And sometimes it just takes brutal honesty too, to sit down and be like, we're not getting up until we've admitted which one is which. And sometimes you're not ready yet. Sometimes you're like, no, I actually don't have, like, I need to sit with this more. I actually don't know. But sometimes that's what you have to do to get there too. And sometimes you don't have to push it either. Like sometimes you don't have to make a decision right away. You can give it time. There's nothing wrong with following your emotions too. You just have to be honest about what your intuition is telling you.
Sometimes I think most of the time I would say my intuition scares me. Like the difference between emotions and intuition is most of the time what I intuitively know that I need to do, it's like there's some sort of resistance because either I've never done it before or maybe I see how it'll build momentum in a way that I'm not prepared for or something. But it usually scares me.
Yeah, intuition's tough. She's a no nonsense lady. She's just like, this is how it is. And sometimes you're like, I didn't want to hear that. Like, no, not yet. But yeah, it's tough, but also kind because she's always pushing you in the direction that you need to go.
I would agree. So to go into the traveling thing, it's been very interesting to me just as I have gone from, this normal world of this is what work looks like, this is what success looks like, to this different world where it's like, no, actually, you can define success, and success is primarily innate. It's like, okay, well, what do I want? Like you were saying. I do think that a lot of people have a desire to travel, and I don't think that that's wrong. Like, I think a lot of people are like, oh, like that's icing on the cake. But I actually think traveling is amazing and it should be done by more people. And you've done a lot of it. So what have you learned about yourself through all of the traveling? How did your travel journey begin as well?
Yeah, I've learned so much about myself from traveling. And part of it's because every time you go somewhere new, there's a small metamorphosis that happens. Like every time you go somewhere new, you reinvent yourself just a little. And reinvent yourself might be too trite of a term. I'm not sure that's actually the most precise way of putting it, but I mean, just think about it. Like you go to a new place and you're interacting with new people. And every time you interact with a person, there's a specific part of yourself that is elicited in that conversation. Like there are questions you're asking me and an energetic signature that you have in the way that you're interacting that brings out certain parts of me that the next podcast I go on and the next interview I have, that person's going to be totally different and is going to bring out different parts of me. And even though like these are all parts of me that are being brought out, the combination with every single person that you interact with is a little bit different. Like when you really pay attention to it, you're a little tiny bit different with all the different people that you interact with, even if it's just the array of different subject materials that you're working with. Like if you think about all the different subjects that you're able to talk about as like different pigments, and there's like a collection of pigments that are like put into the mix when I'm talking to you, that would be different when I'm talking to somebody else, and that makes like a distinctive hue when you mix those colors together. Even if it's subtle, it's like you're a slightly different shade of purple from somebody else who would also be like talking about all the different same subject materials, but like has a different energy they bring to it or something like that. So every single person that you meet brings out a different side of you, even if it's subtle. And every different place that you go has its own unique features, its own unique character and energy, its own unique things to explore, and it brings out different pieces of you. So every time you go somewhere new, you get to discover yourself in the context of that place and those people. And so you're constantly learning. And every time you go somewhere new and you're like, because I tend to travel for like longer periods of time. So I'm often going somewhere for a month or two, not just a weekend. So I'm reestablishing a routine every time I go somewhere new. It's like, okay, new space, new routine. This is the best time possible to reset my reading habits or my morning routine or what time I go to bed or my eating habits or like whatever. It can be a reset. So you're kind of like dialing in the calibration of how you're doing life every time you're traveling too. And then I do most of my travel solo. So I'm learning a lot about myself in the context of different places and how I as an individual interact with them, not just like I'm very in tune with what's going on inside of me, not just I think that's much harder when you're traveling with people to tap into that. So definitely a mechanism for self-exploration. Also just learning what you like you go somewhere new and everything's different. You're like, okay, well, I really like this thing, but I don't like this thing. And I feel like in some ways I'm kind of a conglomerate of a lot of the places I've traveled to. Cause like I've picked up, like there are things about the culture in Texas that I love. And I spent a lot of time in Texas. So I've picked up like little things that people do in Texas where I'm just like, I really love that people do this here. Like I want to be like this too. And then I spent time in South Carolina for a while, and people dress much classier there, much more classy there than they do in the Northeast where I'm from. And like, I have things in my wardrobe now that are staples that like, I didn't wear clothes like that before I moved to Charleston. And then I was like, no, this is great. I want to be like these people. I love this. So there's like little things like that too that you pick up. But for me, I always wanted to travel. I love exploring new places. There are a few things that make me happier than going somewhere new. And I was working in person for a while when I was full-time with Praxis. We had an office in Charleston. And in 2019, like late 2019, the team all went remote. And I was like, okay, I'm done with the whole having a lease thing. I'm done with the whole being stuck in one place thing. If I'm going to spend money living somewhere, I'm going to spend money traveling and going and exploring new places. And I have not been tempted to sign a lease anywhere since. I just love it.
Were you ever like afraid to do that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I was terrified.
So what did you do? Like, that's my biggest hiccup is just like, I hear all of these stories or I see in my mind these maybe negative situations or like, and I know, logistically speaking, I know that most of the time, 90% of the time, 80% of the time, bad things don't happen. And I mean, bad things could happen where I am. But for some reason, the thought permeates my mind. I guess it's because it's the unknown. So like,
yeah.
How did you get over that? How do you make sure you stay safe? How do you find places to go for just a month or 2 months?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time living in Airbnbs, and I have like a whole safety protocol checklist that I go through for Airbnb. Like that it's not like an actual checklist. It's just in my head. Like these are the criteria that something needs to match for me. Like I need to know the area. I need to make sure it's safe. I need to be going somewhere that has a lot of reviews. It's not like some weird, creepy person who just listed their room on Airbnb. Like it has to be something that a bunch of people have verified is legit. It needs to be something like I work from home too, so I need a place that's like my own space, not just a room in somebody's house, which also kind of alleviates some of the creepy factor. Like it's, you have your own space. It's not like you're in somebody's house and you're like, this is uncomfortable, I don't like this. So it's like a whole list of things that I'm looking for when I'm traveling. But for me, I was pretty analytical about it, honestly. I was like, this is the list of risks that I'm willing to incur, and this is the list of risks that I'm not willing to incur. Like, I know a lot of people who travel solo internationally. I have a friend who, I think she spent like 3 years going to a new country every single month, and she just like land in Thailand on the 1st of May, and she'd just be like, all right, I live in Thailand this month. And then May 31st, she'd be on an airplane going to like Hong Kong or something. And she's like, all right, now I live in Hong Kong for a month. And she wouldn't know anybody in any of these places. And I just don't have that risk tolerance. I would never do that. Like her life sounded amazing, but the benefit of what I would get from that experience would not outweigh the potential cost in my mind, even just like the stress cost. So I'm just not as daring of a person as she is. But so for me, there's like a threshold of what risk I am and am not willing to incur. But for me, like I'm just traveling around the US all year. So it's really easy to just pick up and go to the next city or town or state or wherever it is I want to go. And a lot of it, like I spend a lot of time traveling, at least in general regions where I know somebody. It's like, okay, I might be in one corner of Colorado, but like I have enough friends in Colorado where if like I really needed something, I could call somebody. And that's a safety precaution for me that I prefer. Like I've done long stretches of road trip where it's like I don't know where the next person is that I know anybody, and I don't mind that. That's fine. But like generally speaking, I'm just always kind of aware of like what safety precautions I have set up. But for me, I think it was kind of just an expansion process of like, I know how to take road trips. And I know how to like be in a new city because I've done that. So like if I'm going to go across the country and go somewhere I've never been before, but I know like a couple people there who can kind of give me some recommendations, that expands the comfort zone of what I'm comfortable with. It's like, okay, now this state is a known, and this new city is a known quantity. And the experience of doing this is a known quantity. And I feel like I can replicate it and feel a little bit safer when I'm going to the next place. I think the first couple of trips are the hardest, where it's just like all kinds of unknowns. And then you settle in and you're like, oh, this is way more accessible than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. So first, I'm going to be moving. I'm trying to decide where, though. I think intuitively, I think that my heart is set on Tennessee. I think it is. I'm not sure. I'm going to go and visit, and because I'm starting a remote position soon, I'm like, well, I might as well travel and try these places out. But the idea of solo travel has always been kind of like not terrifying, not that level, but like slightly what's a good synonym? I'm just careful. Like I don't want to so I wouldn't have my car, so then a ton of Ubers, and then you have to make sure that you're in the right areas. And what are the different I guess guidelines you've created for yourself and would recommend for other people?
Yeah, so I drive everywhere when I'm traveling around the country because I want to have my car with me. It's like I don't want to fly to Colorado and then be stuck in Denver. Like I want to like use Denver as my hub and go travel around all of Colorado, which is what I did the summer of 2020. Like I was staying in Denver, but then every weekend I was up in the mountains, like exploring some new mountain county or park somewhere. And so for me, my setup, I drive an SUV. I've got like all of the things that I'm going to need for months on end stashed in the trunk. And it's like under one of those protective, like one of those covers for your trunk. So like nobody can see I've got a car full of stuff. So it's like it's pretty safe. It's not a target for anybody. And so that helps. That helps with expenses too, because you're not Ubering everywhere. I also always rent Airbnbs that have kitchens so I can cook. So I'm not spending tons of money on food too. That's also important. Like when I'm looking for an Airbnb, I'm looking for something that's super safe, something that has a kitchen, something that has good Wi-Fi, and I'm willing to spend more on the Airbnb because I can offset all the other costs, no problem. So that's kind of how I think about that. But I'll do. Again, I prefer going places where I know somebody at least relatively accessible, because it's good to have, like when you're way out in the middle of nowhere and you're alone and you need something and it's like the nearest airport is 2 hours away. And like if something happened to me, not that it would, but if something happened to me, like I don't even know what I'd do. That's, again, everybody's risk tolerance is different, and it's not something like I sit around worrying about, but I tend to be careful about that. Like I make sure I always have a safety plan in place. But again, like it's not like if you're traveling around the country, especially, like it's a culture that it's not like you're somewhere where you don't speak the language and you don't know the norms and you don't understand how law enforcement works and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, like I don't know what's happening. It's much more of a known quantity than that. But for you specifically, I would say if you want to go somewhere, but you feel intimidated about traveling alone, go spend a month in a city where you have a couple of friends. Like go pick or go pick a city where there's a bunch of Praxians and just like go hang out there for a month. Like Charleston, South Carolina, there's a bunch of Praxians there. So you'd have a built-in support network and built-in friends. And the built-in friends thing's really nice too, because it's hard to meet people. Like, it's not hard to meet people. You go to a coffee shop and you make new friends. But it's helpful to be tapped into the right social networks in a city. And usually the people your friends like are going to be people you like too. So I like going to places where I know at least somebody for that too, because it makes the acclimating into the culture of a place a lot easier. But like if you went to Charleston and you have a network there and you have people who can show you around and people you can meet up with and you can build a network in the city, and you also have somebody you could call if something ever went wrong, that's where I would start. I'd pick a place where you already know somebody and then branch out to the places where you don't later, once you're comfortable with all the other pieces of travel.
I like that a lot. I hadn't thought about South Carolina. I thought about North Carolina. My top 3 options right now are Florida, Tennessee, and North Carolina. But I'm open to South Carolina too. I think that'd be really interesting.
Well, I'm just throwing it out there as an example because that's the only place I could think of off the top of my head where it's like, I know you would have a network there because we have the same connections there. Austin is great. I would recommend Austin. Austin's a good one.
Yeah, I need to kind of just like figure out what I want to do, and then I'm kind of getting to this point where I'm like, I really want to be alone. Not like where I can't, reach out to anybody if I need it, but it's more of like how much can I learn about myself? What do I gravitate towards? What are my impulses? If I'm alone I was alone for a month, and because my roommate was at home because, school was over for a little while, and like, it was amazing how much growth I experienced in just a month of like, okay, I talk to myself, or like I am thinking about certain topics and I can fully follow them throughout because it's just me. It's just like, I don't know, it's nice. And then waking up in the morning and it being exactly what I want it to be. It's nice.
Yeah, the uninterrupted think time is really nice. That's why I love long road trips too. I can just get in the car and drive for like 12 hours and nobody talks to me. It's amazing. But yeah, alone time is very underrated. It's very important for the self-discovery process.
No, yeah, I have this one drive that I make frequently enough, and it's like 3.5 hours ish, almost 4, and it's just like one straight shot highway. So I'll set the settings on my car and then just like zone in and just think. And it's very therapeutic. I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I would too. It's a good time. People ask me because I spend a lot of time on the road because I'm traveling around the country all the time, and I'll frequently do like 2 or 3 days, I'll do like a 1,500-mile road trip solo. And people are like, what do you do? Like, do you listen to books? You must be so productive. Do you listen to podcasts? Like, what music keeps you going? It's like, I like music. Like when I'm tired and I need to pick me up, it's great. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'll listen to podcasts, but honestly, I love doing a 3-day drive and just thinking the whole time. It's amazing.
That sounds awesome. How do you find good deals on Airbnbs?
Book for 30 days or more. You can get really great discounts. A lot of places, it depends on, I almost never book Airbnbs that aren't a month-long stretch. Depends on the listing because it's the host is choosing how they want to set it up, but a lot of Airbnbs will offer like a 30% discount or even more. Like I've even gotten a 50% discount almost by booking a full month. Because it's great for the host. They have the full month booked. They don't have to clean it. They don't have to do all the turnover stuff. They're guaranteed income for a month. They love it. And it's way more affordable to do it that way. And then also, and this is something that, the only time I've done this was during COVID when everybody was canceling their bookings, and I booked an Airbnb in Denver for the entire summer. And I emailed these people. I'd stayed with them before, and I emailed them and I was like, here's my proposed price. How would you feel if I book your Airbnb for the entire summer at this price? And they were like, everybody's canceled, so sure. So I can't speak to how easy it is to negotiate a deal if you don't have that going in your favor, but you can't hurt to ask too, especially if you have an existing relationship with somebody. But yeah, book for 30 days or more, and you can find really great deals. Also look at housing groups for whatever city you're going to, because you can often find sublets. Like, there are often people who's like, I'm moving for work and I'm looking for somebody to take over my lease for 2 months at the end, so my roommate's not stuck with it. And sometimes that can be a really great deal too.
Where do you find good sublets?
I would just look up housing groups on Facebook for whatever city you're going to. You can look at things like hot pads and apartment listing sites or Craigslist. I just find the Facebook groups the easiest, and also like people are a little bit of more of a known quantity on Facebook, so it's a little easier to suss things out. But that can be a worthwhile place to look for things too. I've seen so many people posting in, like, I usually just do Airbnbs, but I've seen so many people posting about, hey, I'm looking for somebody to take over the last 2 months of my lease, and that's going to be a lot cheaper than an Airbnb.
No, yeah. I love this. Okay, I hadn't thought about going somewhere for like 30 plus days, but I actually think it's a really great idea.
It's a better way to travel because you get to actually experience the place. You want to be in a place long enough to set up a routine. If you're not there long enough to set up a routine, like, you weren't really there. You were just a tourist. You didn't get to like experience the place. You need the time elapsed to be like, okay, I really like got to know this place. It's like having a 30-minute coffee date with somebody versus a 4-hour conversation over dinner and drinks. Like, there's just a difference in the level of knowledge and intimacy that you have. And I think places are the exact same way. You need the time.
No, I love that. I'm definitely going to be looking into that. Okay, the last topic before I let you go. How do I get better at writing? If I really want to get better at writing, what are some tips, tools? How did you get better at it? I think my thing right now is like, I love writing, but I can't consistently write super well. Like, I'll write well and then I'll have to like let it go and then come back to it the next day. But I can't just like write for 2 or 3 hours and just like have good stuff.
What are the biggest challenges that you run into? Do you feel like the inspiration ebbs and flows? Is it like like sometimes you're in the zone and sometimes it's really hard to get out of your own head and into the zone? Or is it more just like a technical, like sometimes the writing just sounds good and sometimes it's just really messy?
Both the flow and the messy. Sometimes it's good.
Okay.
Like, sometimes I look at it and I'm like, congrats. And then other times I'm like, that needs help.
Yeah, that's a great question. The one word answer is write. Just write a lot. And that's really the best thing you can do. Like, there is no replacement for the hours. And I would say, if you're not spending tons of time writing and you're not making it like a regular part of your routine, I definitely would. I would also say that the not as focused writing times are just as important as the really focused ones. So like sitting down and doing the technical work of writing an article is important, but you need the exploratory times too, which is why I recommend Julia Cameron's morning pages so much. Like, it just gets you in the flow of writing without, like, nobody's ever going to read them. It's like journaling, but you're really like playing with the words and the turns of phrase, and you're being creative, and you're just like playing on the page and seeing what feels good and where it takes you. And I would say that's a really valuable use of your time too. Read writers that you really admire and whose writing, both whose content you admire and also whose style you admire. And if you want, you can even try copying them. Like, pull up somebody's article on one screen, and on your other screen, like, type it out word for word and feel it. Feel the way the prose moves, feel how it sounds, feel how they use words. There's a lot of stuff that you miss when you're just skimming over the top of it, reading it. But when you're like inside of the words, typing them out, you notice things that people are doing. There's another great writing exercise called the keyword outline, which Benjamin Franklin, that's what he used to learn how to write. And basically what you do, you take an essay, and for each paragraph or each sentence, depending on how the paragraph or how the essay is structured, like if it's a really dense essay, you want to do it sentence by sentence. If it's shorter, you want to do it paragraph by paragraph. But distill each section to like 2 or 3 keywords. So like take the sentence or the paragraph and like write down like 2 or 3 words that sum up what was said, and then take your outline and rewrite based on those keywords. So you're like, okay, these were the 3 points that were covered here. I'm going to rewrite it in my own words. And that's a really great way to learn about structuring ideas, but also how to do it in your words instead of somebody else's. That can be a really effective exercise. And find really great writing mentors, which is not necessary. You'll be fine without them, but they will accelerate the process so much. If you find people who are willing to read your posts and give you line by line feedback or talk through ideas with you, you will learn so much so quickly. And they'll be able to point things out to you that you just like can't see when you're looking at your own writing. So I would say practice a lot and do it in both focused and unfocused capacities, but look for things that you can try to more deliberately study good writing. Read good writing, which is really important. Like what you bring in is what you breathe in is what you breathe out. So what you consume is going to be what you create too. And when you're reading, like my writing always gets more interesting when I'm reading good fiction. Like always. I pick up a novel and start like a good novel, a literary novel, and I start reading it. And then I'm like, oh, this article that I wrote today is just prettier because I have good things coming in. So read good writing, and then find people who are willing to help you with that process if you can, because they'll be really invaluable for you.
That's awesome. Are there any good fiction books you would recommend?
Yes. Do you have anything in particular that you like genres or topics, or other, like what are your favorite books? Because I could give you a whole list, but I want to tailor this for you. Okay.
So I have not been into fiction for a while. I love so what I do, I think the problem is that I get really into fiction, but then I'll just start skimming because I want to get to the end. And that's not good.
Got it.
So most of my books have been nonfiction. Whenever it comes to fiction, something highly imaginative is awesome to me. Like I love something highly imaginative because I'm a pretty visual person in general. Like I love to think things out, even just like regular things. Like how does this business plan look in my mind? How does my room look if I were going to redecorate it? And I'll just like close my eyes and I'll see everything. So like I love highly visual, highly imaginative writing as well. And then I guess the writing that I want to do well is semi-technical business writing, but like I want it to be a little bit more interesting than it usually is. So kind of like a mix between technical business, but interesting and captivating as well.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, fiction recommendations. So I love the novel Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. It is a beautiful piece of literature. The writing is just stunning, and it's fast-paced enough that like it's pretty easy to work your way through. It is probably the most underrated American classic in my opinion. It's so good. It's the one everybody should start with. It's just amazing. I also really love Barbara Kingsolver, and she has my favorite novel of hers that I've read so far is Prodigal Summer. And that's also just I really love beautiful literature, and that's a beautiful novel. And it's going to be descriptive enough that you're going to appreciate it. And it's also set on the border between Virginia and Kentucky, so it's farther north than North Carolina, but it's like got that very Appalachian feel. So if you're like very drawn to North Carolina and intrigued by it, you'll probably enjoy this book. Read it in the springtime. You have to read it in the springtime. You'll understand why when you read it. It's just like the most evocative of spring book I think I've ever read. It just like pulses with springtime. It's amazing.
Okay. I do want to let you get back to the recommendations, but one interesting thing that I imagine that you'll have some thoughts on. I've been thinking a lot about this concept of infusing life and spirit into things that are like material, right? Like you can have a painting that's just like it has life, like it speaks. You can have a building that's just like, I don't know, something about it. It's just animated. And then you can also have these things that are just flat and dull and lifeless. How do we create more like full of life things?
By getting really, really, really in tune with our own inner creative force, because our own inner creative force is extremely vibrant and lively and lifelike. And when you're creating from that space, you're going to be creating things that have that energy, versus where you're creating from a very utilitarian standpoint, you're not. So I'm going to recommend Julia Cameron again. The Artist's Way, the morning pages. She talks about that. She talks about not specifically your question, but I think you'll see the context. I think you'll see it through that lens. Creating things that are very full of, infused with our inner creative spirit. At least that's my 2 cents on it.
I love that. I'll definitely check it out. And it's also great because like whenever you have remote work or whenever you're at home, you get to choose how you start your day. You get to choose, you have more time because you don't have to drive anywhere. So then it's a nice thing is to like, okay, I'm going to sit down and do these morning pages. So I'm excited. What other books would you recommend?
This is not a tailored recommendation for you specifically, but I can't give a reading list without including this. The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand is just necessary. It's just such a good book. And it's also very descriptive. So if you like it's long and it takes a little while to like really get into it and be captivated by it, but it's worth it. It's a really good book. What else? This is always so hard for me because I'm going through my entire library in my head. I'm like, okay, which ones are the most important to list off? And probably like anytime you catch me on any different day, you'd get an entirely different list, to be quite honest with you. Ernest Hemingway's collection of short stories is really fantastic. I read that pretty frequently. Would recommend. Also, Isaac Babel has a collection of short stories called The Red Cavalry Stories, which is probably some of the most vivid fiction I have ever read. He does this very interesting thing. You know, when you listen to song lyrics and they're much shorter than like reading a short story about the same thing. Like if you just read the lyrics in the form of a short story, it would feel incredibly sparse. But because you have all this tonality that's going on in contrast with like the chords and the melody, and then you have these song lyrics too, and you get this entire like infusion of a whole story in the span of 3 minutes when you're listening to a song, you know that feeling. Every paragraph he writes is like that. He has this really interesting contrast between very pragmatic, just like, and then this happened, and then very vivid descriptions that give a resonance almost to the stories that he writes. They're really good. I would really highly recommend that too. I'm going to leave the list there for now because I could go on about this forever. And I think those are probably, in the mood that I'm in today, those are the most important ones to read. Those are like the most important top of the head recommendations. But if you read those, I'm happy to give you more recommendations too. Or if you're like, what about a book on this topic? I might have something for you too.
Okay, no, that's amazing. Thank you very much. And hey, if I read these, I'll definitely ask you for more recommendations because they all seem very
Well, also tell me what you think. I want to know.
yeah. No, yeah, 100%. I was recommended the Fountainhead earlier today actually as well. So looks like that one is going to be a higher on the list read twice in
It's
one day.
good. It's a
Yeah.
good book. I would recommend it highly.
I read Anthem. That was my first one, and that was
Okay.
really really good one. Especially to start off with, just like an introduction because it's short and sweet and to the point. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, it's a commitment to read all of Fountainhead,
Hmm.
but it's the same ideas as Anthem, except just dramatically fleshed out in among many characters and many situations, and much more of like a day-to-day life type of story. It's a really beautiful book.
I'm excited. Okay, I'm gonna get into my rapid fire questions for you. Okay, are you ready? Answer top of mind.
I don't know, am I?
I don't know. I mean, I think so. I think the spirit of how we've been going through this, it's pretty similar to the spirit of these questions. Okay.
Okay.
First, what do you value in life?
Freedom.
What does that mean to you, though?
The freedom to do whatever I want to do and whatever feels most aligned for me, and defending other people's freedom to do whatever is right for them. And then building wealth in not just monetarily, but in terms of relationships and experiences and knowledge. I want to die a very wealthy person. And by very wealthy, I don't just mean monetarily. I mean in all aspects of life. That's the goal.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I like it. It reframes wealth, and I think it's a little bit more accurate. What is a good life?
A life that was very self-actualized. A life where you got to live on your own terms and do the things that you wanted to do. And I think the definition of that is really different for every single person. But a life that brought you the experiences that you coveted and the connections that you craved and the learnings about whatever it was you were curious to experience. I think that's a good life.
I love that. All right, this next question. What lights your spirit up?
A lot of things. A lot of things. Traveling, reading, having meaningful conversations with people, a lovely night with good friends, exploring new places, learning about new things, creating. There are a lot of different things that light me up. And I think the variety of getting to experience a lot of them is actually the most important thing.
I like that. I like that a lot. Well, okay. Slight side note or question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you come to a place where you find those things that light you up truly? Like just doing more of what you think you should be doing, or like
I think it's following the curiosity. I think the curiosity is the key. I think it's following the things that you're curious about and being like listening to that intuition, that self-knowledge that's saying, okay, this is what I actually want to be spending time doing versus this is what I, think I should be doing, but is not necessarily super aligned with me. And then trying a bunch of stuff. Like you're not always able to predict what's going to light you up. Sometimes you have to try stuff and you're like, wait a second, this is really cool.
I like that. It's interesting. It's like recognizing your time and energy as currency, not just time, but energy as well. And so then letting go of the things that you don't need or you don't want anymore, and then spending it on what you do. That's awesome. Okay, last question. If you could leave only one piece of advice for the world, for generations below you, what would it be?
Do things because you want to do them, not because anybody else said you should. Always do things because you want to do them. And always take responsibility for the fact that you made the choice to do things.
That would save a lot of heartache.
Freedom and responsibility, that's all you need. That's the formula for a good life.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult because like whenever you realize how many choices you actually have and how many choices you can actually make, it's almost like paralyzing until you figure out who you are. It's like, where do I go?
Yeah, a little bit, but there's a lot of good things to explore too while you figure out the answer to that question.
No, I agree. I love that. I love that so much. All right. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed having you on this podcast. Our conversation has been, it's been very life-giving, like just so, so beautiful. So thank you very much.
You asked great questions. You facilitated a really lovely conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here.
Yeah, of course. Maybe we can do it again sometime, and I will be seeing you.
Yes, I would be honored. And yes, I will see you soon.
I hope that you found this episode enriching. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you would like to write a rating or a review, that would be fantastic. You can also follow me at Igloo Podcast. I'm looking forward to our next episode. Cheers.